A few announcements. Allison, you go first.
I look forward to seeing it.
Good evening, everybody. I'd just like to make a quick announcement about the upcoming Silicon Valley Automotive Open Source Meetups on February 22nd, coming right up. We're having an event at the Prospect SV Incubator and Accelerator in San Jose. We will have a hands-on at the driving lab, driving simulator. I think there are about 5 spots left in that. Then we have ability to tour the center without using the driving simulator, see everything else. And there's plenty of space left in that. Then on March 3rd, for something completely different, at Ford in Palo Alto, we're going to have an automotive cybersecurity researcher from Ford talk about a hacker's view of manipulating people, which is a talk that will be presented earlier in the week at the RSA conference in San Francisco. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dave to announce his meetup.
Okay, howdy. Yeah, my name is Dave. I'm a building architect, and I'm here because I lead a roundtable of people in real estate, construction, design, and we want to focus on autonomous vehicles and their impact on cities and facilities. So we've organized an event in San Francisco on March 2nd, and I'm looking for anybody who's interested in attending and anybody who's interested in possibly co-presenting, along with the transportation engineer from Erik Engineering, the global firm, who is specifically studying this topic of the impact on cities and buildings. So please come look for me afterwards. I'm really interested in engaging you. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad that's March 2nd, because March 3rd is our next meetup with Richard Bishop. Richard, wave your hand. Okay, so that's our next meetup. I haven't announced it yet. I will just after this one, but on the website, created as an event. But it will actually not be here. It will be at RTI. RTI has offered to host, and it's just down the street. We're going to be having some construction going on in here in March. So we will be, if you come here, I will have a paper on the door that says you're close and directions about where to go. So be on the lookout for that. Also, I sent out some organizer announcements, I think last night. There's people have posted stuff on the message board about job opportunities, about conferences that are coming up this spring and summer. There's a lot of really interesting conferences. And of course, they always offer either free or discounted attendance to our meetup group. So I just sent that out. So check and see. If you didn't get it, you're probably not subscribed to organizer messages. And I send about once a month, maybe twice, but usually I pull them all together when people send them to me instead of sending them, and then I send it as one big email. So go check that out. So we are excited for tonight's meetup, and I will say a few more words when Martin swallows his pizza, because Martin is going to come up, and Martin is the director of this facility, and is going to give the official introduction of our speakers tonight. We're excited to have 2 of our researchers from Nissan Research Center here in Silicon Valley. So, Martin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Martin Searhouse, and I'm actually very excited tonight. This is the first time we are actually presenting something. Last time. No, just kidding. And it's, I think it's really one of the differences between how we approach developing the autonomous vehicle from how other companies are developing the autonomous vehicle. And that is that, from my background, when I came here to start this center, I immediately said, I want to bring in the human-centered side of the story. Because as engineers, we always forget that we are building technology for people. And when I was in university, I had a professor who tried to teach us that, and his example was like, okay, you give a software engineer requirements for a toaster, and you have 2 requirements. It needs to toast the bread, and you want to have it light brown and brown. And he said, you will, after 2 years of hard work, never talking to the software engineer again, you will get a toaster that washes your dishes and sets the temperature in your house, and but will never toast your bread in any way, shape, or form. And I think what we need to avoid is that we have an autonomous vehicle that does anything but drive like we want it to drive. So it was not easy to find good people, but I found Melissa, stole her from IBM Research. And Melissa has decades of experience in researching, how people behave and what people do, and do social research in high-tech organizations like IBM, but also at Sapient, and before that at the Institute for Research and Learning. And her research actually includes designing technical systems, organizational design, and look at it from the point of view of practice. It's not, what needs to be done, but actually what people do, right? And this is what I think is essentially what is needed to understand how we need to build autonomous vehicles. We need to understand how people drive today and how people interact on the road. She also serves on a national committee for the National Academies of Sciences on the professional work of people and activities. And I don't know, you're not going to talk about that, but so she's doing stuff at the research level, at the highest levels. She's also publishing a lot in anthropological conferences, and she's trained as an anthropologist. And then we have Erik, and I stole Erik away from Xerox PARC. But Erik and I worked together at NASA before that. And before that, we worked together with the Institute for Research and Learning. So I know Erik for a long time already. And Erik is an AI researcher and software person that went crazy and became a sociologist. So the great thing is that Erik knows both sides of the story. He knows about what it means to build AI systems and how people need to work with AI systems, and then also about how people actually generally work together and studies, as he says, studies of people and technology in the wild. So, without further ado, Erik and Melissa, and give them a round of applause because I'm excited.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us for, as Martin said, the first chance for Nissan to actually present here. And I think you're getting the kind of wild side of things with us. But we'll really look forward to hearing your comments and thoughts as we go, especially at the end. So we want to introduce you to some of the work that we've been doing to understand the way that, as Martin said, driving happens, street life happens, what people do and think with cars and transportation mobility in cities. And in particular, we're going to focus on the work we've been doing to really understand street use and road life, what happens on the road. But before we get there, I do want to sort of back up and say, why a social science perspective? So, as you heard, we both are sociologists. Social scientists. I originally trained as an anthropologist, and Erik happily became a sociologist. And we have a lot of experience working across different social science disciplines to understand and think about the role of technology in lives. And what we want to see here is, and look at, and what we're contributing to Nissan is to really understand, again, mobility, transportation, and technology design through a social lens. So let's just think about cars for a minute. Cars are very social objects. We encode them with a lot of cultural meaning. Here's a picture of taxis, especially all those colorful ones in taxis in Bangkok. We have a motorcycle with a portrayal of this guy's identity, an American flag, his dog in the back with him. We have a jeepney from the Philippines, a really strong presentation of a national identity, playing with a history of military background and the Beatles, music and performance, very strong sense of who they are. Cars play into our rituals and our celebrations in our lives. This was a car that was driving some women around in I think it was Birmingham in the UK for a bridal shower. So they play a role in a lot of important elements and social dimensions of our lives. Vehicles get repurposed in some interesting ways. This is a motorcycle designed probably for one, maybe two people. You see it's got 4 people on it, these monks who are traveling down a road in Cambodia. And people sort of use their vehicles to get around, obviously, and do what's easy and convenient, but maybe also to do things like flaunting authority. You know, the guy driving down the street on his motorcycle with a helmet prominently displayed off to the side, not on his head. This one is in Iran. So the artifacts that we use play a strong role in representing us, having a sense of identity. But it's not just how we encode these actual artifacts, it's also what happens on the roads and in the streets. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play here. How many of you have seen this? So I didn't really need the sound. I'll try to speak over the sound a little bit. Some of you have seen this? All right, so this is San Francisco in 1906 before the earthquake. And this is some really interesting, if you pay attention to the roads here, basically you have very untamed roads. Now we do have people driving roughly on one side or the other, but there's not much else that's regulated. There's no crosswalks, there's no clear sense of who has the right of way. If you think about it, this was a moment in which the notion of jaywalking didn't exist. This wasn't even a thinkable concept. Jaywalking had to get created as a social construct of something that would be used to regulate how the streets operated, what happened on the roads. And in that case of jaywalking, for example, it was the pedestrians who were being regulated, who were being told where and how they could operate and move to make the roads safer for their cars. So the kind of question we ask is, what does the future hold with autonomous vehicles? What will the streets look like? What will be happening? Who will have what kinds of rights and opportunities? Some of this comes down to how the autonomous vehicles are designed. So even though we've started with this very broad look at sort of the social and cultural aspects of, some aspects, we'll hint at some of the things that happen with cars and transportation, our real focus is to work very closely with our engineering and scientific teams who are developing the autonomous system, because we understand that all the technologies that we use every day were built by people. That means that they're built with assumptions about how people operate, what they want, who they are, and how things work. Sometimes these assumptions are thought about deeply, and sometimes they're not thought about at all, but they just get encoded into the technology. So it's kind of our role to be, don't tell my boss, but it's our role to be kind of the nudge and to say, look, you got to pay attention to how things are getting designed. So specifically what we're focused on is developing what we're calling socially acceptable autonomous driving. And we're especially focused on city driving, so autonomous vehicles for cities. So what this immediately means is that we have to pay a lot of attention to the interactions that occur in cities between vehicles, pedestrians, and bicycles in particular, and often many other kinds of odd vehicles. So cities, and especially intersections in cities, are very interaction-dense kinds of environments. And this is borne out if you look at the accident statistics, that intersections tend to be where there's a lot of problems that can occur. And maybe it's especially bad in some ways in the United States with these very ambiguous state of four-way stops. Stop signs are an item that have to be interpreted. They're not very clear exactly what they mean and what they're telling you. So we're trying to understand what happens in those intersections. Now the good news is that the other technologists here and those who are developing the systems, as with other OEMs and people developing autonomous vehicles, will do everything in our power to make the system so that it will avoid collision. So the key thing that we're doing is not to get to the sort of brute force of how do you avoid collision, although we care about that too, but it's really to go a little bit deeper and say, okay, if we can believe that we'll have systems that will be largely able to avoid collision, what else do we need to worry about? And what we need to worry about is how these subtle interactions occur that make it able for us to travel and move really smoothly and operate and have flow that really continues and and works in a good kind of way. So what we're really aiming for is how can we increase that sort of efficiency and flow on the road, but also create peace of mind and smoother travel for everybody. So the particular question that we've started in our first projects and what we've been focused on is this question of whether and how autonomous vehicles should be able to communicate with other road users. So we're used to thinking about, many of us who are in the autonomous vehicle world are used to thinking about the interaction between a driver and their displays, or the person formerly known as driver, and the displays and what they're going to have in front of them. But we're taking the question from the other side. What happens on the streets and other people who are encountering the AV? And what you see here is this picture of a fella crossing the street and doing the very typical, we've all seen this, probably most of us have done that, confirmation nod, have you seen me? Yes, you've seen me. Okay, I'm going to keep going kind of thing. So these are the kinds of things that we really pay attention to. Just as a reminder of where the development is, we're trying to get the state of the industry to be able to move from kind of where we are today, which is fairly comfortable autonomous driving on highways in a single lane, increasingly moving to the sort of multi-lane, but our focus is over here in the cities, which again involve all these complicated situations with a lot more signals and intersections and stop and go, and those pesky problems of having, people to interact with. The approach that we use as social scientists is to take a naturalistic, empirical approach. So we go out and study people, work with people in their everyday settings to see kind of what the everyday life on the road is, or in the car, or as a walker, or on a bike. So we use especially an ethnographic focus adopted from anthropology and sociology of trying to work with people in natural settings. And you see sort of a bunch of grabs of different kinds of environments that we've been in so far. But the important part, one thing is that we go out to these natural settings to gather our data and to look at what's actually happening in people's everyday practice. Because what people really do and what they say they do, or what models would tell you they do, are always two different things. So we want to get to that granular reality. But then we come back and we do some fairly extensive and in-depth analysis of what we see and what it's telling us. So this is an example of something we call piggybacking. Eric is going to show some deeper examples later and talk about what this is. But in brief, it's a situation where people sort of take advantage and borrow somebody else's right of way to keep moving. And this sort of shifts things around on the road. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to understand to translate that over to the people who are designing the AV system, so that the software would be able to operate sort of with some recognition, and maybe in some cases he can be able to take on some of these behaviors and actions. I also want to point out that we have the great opportunity to keep collaborating with the Design Lab at UC San Diego. This is with Don Norman and a group of researchers there. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric, who will take you into the really fun core of some of the research that we've done and some of the things we've seen, and then I'm going to come back and talk about one of the particular applications that we've already been able to contribute to Nissan about its integrating this thinking. But just to sort of summarize as I hand it over again, as a reminder, we're looking at, what are the real practices of road use, vehicle use, transportation, mobility? What are the social cues that guide interaction and action on the road? How do road users interact and coordinate? And the core question for us, and the one I'm really committed to personally, is how can we create vehicles that are good social actors, valuable social actors in our environments? So without further ado.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you some of these detailed observations that we do while we gather our naturalistic data. And the first thing I wanted to share with you is just a quick observation about kind of how we look at, and I think you do too, how people look at the social world and interpret scenes in ways that are actually rather amazing and sophisticated. And this is a picture that was taken from some of the research that our folks did in San Diego, and this is from them driving down the street, and this is in-city driving, obviously. And this happens. As you may see, that this lady, she's stepping into the road, fairly big step. And if you were to calculate, if your observation, if this was an AV and the observation algorithm were to think about what is the path that this person is going to be taking, you might think that, with inertia, she might be going straight at a reasonably good clip, and you might think that, oh, this could be a potential conflict with me. Because there's if she were to continue at that speed and walk into the road in the direction that she's going, that might be a problem. And yet, I think it's perfectly obvious to all of you that is not what this woman is about to do. She's not going to walk into the street. What she is she is the driver of this vehicle, and she's going around the car and into the driver's seat, while her friend gets into the passenger seat, okay? And I think it's perfectly plain to every one of us that that is what's happening there, and that it is perfectly safe for this car to proceed, okay? But that is what I mean by observing socially, because if you just thought algorithmically, you might think that that might be a problem. But it requires a level of sophistication to understand that in this situation, there really isn't a problem, because this person is going to get into their car. And that is indeed exactly what happened. The person just proceeds on their way. So we're working with the AV team to try and improve the sophistication with which the AV observes the world. And our argument is that it needs to do that what we would call socially. Another thing about, we talked about socially acceptable driving, and when you think about the road and the rules of the road, you have to understand that those rules are normative rules. Even if there are laws, such as a speed limit of 50, we all know that a speed limit of 50 doesn't mean that everybody's going to go 50. And indeed, if you are to go 50, you could be upsetting a lot of people that want to go 60 on that road, right? Similarly, yield signs, yield, what is that supposed to mean? Do you have to yield to everybody all the time? People come to interpret these signs in ways that are acceptable within a culture. And of course, when you go to another country, you will find that it might be a little different there, okay? But we can adapt. We did some interviews with people that are crossing an intersection, and one of the things that one of the pedestrians said, when I come to a stop sign and a car is already stopped, I think they can wait a little longer. Car drivers, on the other hand, might not quite think the same way. They might think, I've stopped, I've done my duty, and now I can go on my way. So even things like stop signs have an inherent ambiguity into how people interpret these signs. And that is what the challenge is with AVs, that we can implement hard rules, but what we really should be thinking about is that rules should be normative, and AVs should probably behave interpreting the rules rather than strictly following them. Here's an example of something that isn't described in any rule book about the way people should be interacting in four-way stop signs. We call this creeping to take one's turn. And when you get into an intersection like this is at Stanford University, you'll probably recognize it. And there's many cars, but the order in which people have to go starts to become a little bit nebulous. And what people do is that they start to creep into the intersection even though their path isn't clear. So in this case, this guy's clearly number one, he's going to go, but this one is already into the intersection and he's clearly displaying to everybody, I am going to go next after this person. That's not a rule that you will see in a rule book. That's not what people say. The DMV book says, in the four-way stop sign, crawl into the intersection even though the path is not yet clear. But that is, as a matter of fact, exactly how people behave. This is just a couple of quick examples of that behavior. And here you'll see this SUV crawling into the intersection even though the path is not clear, right? And then that person goes in front of it. A little bit later, you'll see that this truck will do the same thing. There's pedestrians that are going to be entering here, it's not yet clear, that person goes out of turn. This person, and now he crawls in even though he's not yet clear so that he can go after that, okay? So that's what we mean by creeping behavior. And the interesting part is that we have also videos of cars that don't creep, and guess what? They don't get to go for a long time. So piggybacking, Melissa already mentioned, piggybacking is actually a fairly sophisticated driving style that I think you all do. And it basically involves three cars. Okay? One is a car that is already going. It doesn't have to be a car, but often is. And it is blocking other traffic. The second car that's improperly in the order, number 2, cannot go because it's blocked by the first car. A third car takes advantage of the fact that one goes and goes across. I'm going to show you a few examples of how this happens in quite sophisticated ways, in different ways. So here's a couple of cars that are going. This is the same thing that we just saw. This car comes in last, right? This one was clearly there before him, but takes advantage to go because the other one goes. Here's a truck following a bicycle. The bicycle, oddly enough, doesn't go. Well, we don't see that very often. He waves on this car, then he goes. Since he's blocking this truck, that truck goes with him. Okay? Piggybacking, that truck was there later than the other truck. Bike following truck, this is a very interesting case. Didn't stop too much there at that stop sign. That's a bicycle followed that car. And here, this car goes left. And in that last case, what was interesting is that that car just arrives. There's people here walking on this on the right-hand sidewalk. The car on the other side wants to go left, and so they are blocked by these pedestrians, and this car is also blocked. So in a split second, that person sees that, hey, all the other people are blocked. And when you think about how cars, currently AVs oftentimes think about how to cross an intersection, is that they plan a path and then they see, is my path blocked, right? And then they make decisions based on that. But this is a much more sophisticated kind of interpretation because it means that you have to think about all the other road users, what their path is, and how they might be blocked by third-party people. This is the last thing, Melissa already mentioned it, but part of what we see a lot of, especially between pedestrians and cars in intersections, is that there's some kind of direct interaction that takes place. This guy has a Starbucks on this hand, and on the other hand, he waves to the driver here that is letting him go. Okay? This kind of direct interaction, of course, we see it quite frequently. I'm going to show you a bunch of cases here in different settings. I've tried to circle the people that you need to look at. So she waves, the car waves them on. Here's that same guy. He's going to cross this way. Thank you. Here's somebody. That car is turning left. There's a potential conflict. Look and walk. Waving on. Come on, come on. And then he can go. Here's the person. Oh, is he going to stop? Yes, he is. And here's the guy that Melissa showed you before. Little wave. It is a universal practice. And there it is. The car goes first. The walkers have to wait. Okay? I think it might not be as categorical as all that. I suspect there might be a student among them. What you see there is that there is often this little bit of negotiation. There is almost invariably a look. A look, of course, means I'm just looking whether you're actually stopping for me, but it also, of course, means you've seen me and I want to go. And sometimes that, most of the time, as you saw, that will end up being the pedestrians that go first, and other times you saw that the car ends up going first. The big question is, does an AV need to be able to interact with people directly at the intersections? And how is that going to take place? And if it can't, what can we do to make the interaction between autonomous vehicles and other road users go smoothly? And with that, I'll hand it back.
So to summarize some of the kinds of things that we've seen when we look at hours of video like this, one of our former colleagues from way back when used to call this kind of work, the research on the mundane. I mean, we can spend hours being fascinated by the person walking back across the street and what's in their hand and why is it there and what are they doing. But you can learn a whole lot when you spend time with these kinds of observations. So some of the insights that we've already taken away are these, and there's a lot more that we've been working on and a lot of directions that we're headed, but just to sort of set up how we might apply this. So one is that people try to confirm that they've been seen. This was what Eric was just talking about, the nod, the look. Very often, by the way, a look is followed by a complete removal of attention. Like, now I know you've seen me, and I'm not going to give you the opportunity to try to force me to change my path. So I'm going to look and then look away so that we don't have to negotiate anything else. I'm simply taking my turn. We've seen a lot of this. As Eric also mentioned, people are anticipating what others are doing, and they communicate often to try to anticipate what the actions are. But not only are they anticipating immediately one-to-one, like I would with Serge right now, is he going to look at me, what's going to happen? But I'm kind of wondering if Serge is or isn't looking, maybe there's something else going on. So there's a chain reaction effect that people adjust their actions, not just vis-a-vis the immediate concerns, but paying attention to what those cars or drivers or other pedestrians themselves might be paying attention to, and what the overall effect is. And in fact, I think it's worth pointing out that, actually, let me ask, how many of you have interacted with autonomous vehicles, like maybe on the road, in Mountain View, somewhere? A lot of people, right? Any stories of what happens in that way? Normal? Just passing through? One thing we hear a lot is that people find it very mundane. Again, it's not a very remarkable moment when you sort of cross. We also do hear these little hints of where there's some challenges of maybe pausing too long, being a little unclear who's going to go, being uncertain if it's really safe, and letting the car go first just to be really sure. Keep in mind that at this stage, we're having just one or two autonomous vehicles interact at a time. Multiply that by thousands. Imagine when you have many, many, many on the road and interspersed with other kinds of cars. The kinds of problems we see here, if you don't have a way to attend to this, could really begin to create some problems of backups and a lot of nuisance and potential risks in other cases if we don't have a way to sort of move through these kinds of situations. And so the other key thing that we look at in this is, what does that mean in different sorts of cultural settings? So all these things that people are doing when they're confirming they've been seen or not, the style in which they can do that or not, what's appropriate, is going to be very varied around the world and in different kinds of settings and locations. Somebody said it's because they weren't a student. Indeed, people have very specific expectations when we talk to people on campuses. They'll go on forever about what it's like driving on campus and how it's different when you're just a couple blocks away over downtown Palo Alto, because you don't expect these distracted students and that sort of thing. So locally in different settings we can see variation, but also globally and across different national settings. So all of these expectations and actions and patterns that emerge are going to inform in the minute kind of way what happens on the roads. And here's just some instances of typical scenes in other settings. Bicyclists in Denmark, I could have picked the Netherlands, very typically part of it. Cows on the road in India, other places that would have a lot of other vehicles. One of my favorite stories is crossing the road in Iran and Tehran. Nobody stops, neither the pedestrians nor the cars, and everybody just weaves amongst each other. This is how you get across the road there. So what does all this mean? How can we apply it? So we had the opportunity to use our work to inform a concept car that Nissan unveiled in October in Tokyo called the Intelligent Driving System Concept Car. And specifically what it has here are these indicators that allow for some communication to happen. So there's a couple of things in particular. One is a textual display here. We are considering one in the back. To be perfectly frank, the textual display is really there just for some redundancy and clarity of making very clear the state of the vehicle. I'm waiting, I'm going, I'm stopped, I'm looking. We're still working out exactly how that would be, but that's not likely to be the primary communication tool. The primary communication tool, and we're, again, who knows what this will really become, it's still in research, but we've been working on development, is what we call the intention indicator. So this will be some sort of indicator that will go alongside of the car, will be broadcast and viewable by all the other road participants. Again, remember we're dealing with a multi-agent kind of context, chain reaction. It's not just what I see immediately, but what I know that you also have seen in this other car over there. So we need something that will globally communicate to all people at the same time about the vehicle state. And we are envisioning that this, as we develop it, will be much more interactive. It will take different forms, it will send different messages in different kinds of ways as the situation changes. Am I going? No, you're going, somebody just piggybacked, so I was planning to go, but now I can't, so I'm gonna wait and pause. And then a final thing is the ability to confirm to people that they've been seen. So in this case, that's been executed by having a light strip that will indicate to the pedestrians and to bicyclists who are nearby to say, I see you. If you see this light strip, that means I'm tracking you. So that's our concept. We actually have a video, so bear with us for a few-minute video that really introduces the overall concept. This will give you a chance to see even more about the vehicle itself. We're of course focused on the external communication mechanisms, but there's a lot more to this concept. So we'll play that, and then we'll be interested in hearing your thoughts and questions. Yeah. And if you speak Japanese, you'll be really happy.
車の運転の在り方に革新的な変化が起きようとしています。将来は運転をするかしないかはドライバー次第。自分で運転を楽しむこともできるし、運転から解放されて好きなように自分の時間を楽しむこともできます。日産は移動の喜びを全てのお客様に提供することを目指しています。それを実現したのがNissan IDS コンセプトです。EV 技術がボンネット部分を中心して広い室内空間を実現しています。このインテリアは選択するドライブモードに合わせて変化します。パイロットドライブモードとは日産 IDS コンセプトに搭載された自動運転モードのことでドライバーに代わって運転を行う機能です。このようにステアリングが格納され、インフォメーションパネルが設置されます。パイロットドライブモードでは、4つのシートが一概に少しだけ回転し、乗員全員がリラックスしてコミュニケーションできる時間を生み出します。コネクティッドカーの機能により、インフォメーションパネルには、ルート上の天気情報やソーシャルメディアから送られてくるその他の予定などが表示されます。また、自分の周囲にいる友人や知人の情報なども表示されます。日産 IDS コンセプトのマニュアルドライブモードでは、ドライバー自身が運転操作を行います。インフォメーションパネルに代わり、ステアリングから現れます。フロントウィンドウにはヘッドアップディスプレイが投影され、最適なコーナリングのラインや速度など、運転を楽しむための情報が表示されます。この車では、室内だけが自動化されるわけではありません。日産 IDS コンセプトの主要機能の一つは、車外とのコミュニケーションです。 クスペリアに搭載されたインテンションインジケーターによって周囲の人に車の存在を見させます。日産 IDS コンセプトはレーダー、レーダースキャナー、カメラなどさまざまなセンサーを搭載することで高速道路のみならず街中でも周囲の物体を認識して自ら安全な行動を判断して自動走行を行います。このコンセプトカーでは EV としての基本性能の向上も図っています。低い車高のスタイルはカーボンファイバーと最先端の軽量金属に作られています。そして流線形のボディや最適化されたディティールが優れた空気性能を生み出しています。これらの軽量化と空気性能はさらなる高速距離の向上に貢献します。未来の車は今よりももっと人々の生活に欠かせないものになると思います。車はドライバーの信頼できるパートナーになり、運転がより楽しく、そして移動がさらに価値あるものになるはずです。
So we with that, we obviously as social researchers are interested in a whole range of questions as it concerns autonomous vehicles. But because we're focused especially on the technical development, that's why we want to share the kind of work we've done there. And we'd love to open it up to thoughts, questions, comments.
All right. Whoa, a round of applause for most of them. Yeah, please come. Then we grab another microphone. If you can wait till I bring you the mic, and when you get the mic, hold it really close to your chin like this. The reason why is we're recording. I had a lot of requests to post this afterwards. And it just helps if we can get the question on the mic. So where was my first question? Here we go.
Hi. Thanks for the talk. You mentioned, but I wanted some more detail. How much experience do you have in different areas of the country in your studies? How much difference have you noticed between, let's say, East Coast, West Coast? You mentioned a school or around the school and just in the community. What sort of differences do you notice? Is that going to be a big problem when you're designing these systems, the wide range of things that you're going to have to do?
So we have ourselves looked in a handful of situations. This is not a proposition to get at like easily and lightly, but thank you for asking the question again with my manager here as a reminder why we have to keep traveling the world to do this research. The tickets to Paris are being booked. So we've been quite specific in our selection of some locations in the Bay Area to make sure that we get variety. You saw some of that. We wanted places where the traffic is going to be moving steadily, where it's not a destination, where people are not stop and go. Other places that are much more meant to be kind of pedestrian friendly. The difference between, say, a commercial district and a campus. So we've done some of that, and we'll continue to spread out and get even more of that. We did also do an immersive, intensive 1-week study, so not very much time, but enough to get some quite in-depth sense of how things work ourselves in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and that was in a downtown arena. And frankly, a lot of the things were more similar than different. So in a big urban center where there's a lot of control based on signals, then you tend to have a more regulated kind of environment. But we uncovered some things based on just that experience that were frankly sort of mind-shifting as to what we have to be thinking about. Just as an example, for both bikes and cars, there can be a risk when we would ask about safety and danger, what that usually meant to people and what they would immediately come to mind was their personal safety, carjackings, purse snatchings, that sort of thing. And this actually affected driving behavior. There are certain intersections that are known that people would be very hesitant to come to a full stop. In the middle of the night, if there's not a lot of traffic, then why would you come to a full stop? Because you're putting yourself at risk. So these kinds of things are the things we're paying attention to. We do have colleagues and collaborators who are working in other environments, other parts of California, other parts of the country. They've also done some international work. They spent some time in Korea. And we will be setting up to do some additional work. So yes, we think it's an issue, but I would also invite you to realize that when we all travel, we not only will find that we can walk around where we go, but we even rent cars and we drive, and we do figure out what's happening. And the way we do that is we observe what's going on around us. So when I was in Sao Paulo, you know, one of the things I noticed myself doing is how do you cross the street? Do people jaywalk or not? How, you know, do they wait for the light to change, or are they continuing to go? Is it different during the day from, you know, rush hour? And we pick up those signals like that. And so the other question is, how can we help the AV get very sensitive and learn so that it can figure out variations as it goes? We want to distill out what are the primary and core dimensions to pay attention to, but we don't expect everything's going to be different. Anything more?
Go ahead.
Hello, Jeff Axon from Bosch. First of all, I'd just like to say thank you for bringing social science to this topic. I really haven't seen that guiding and influencing design. My question is whether you've done any ethnographic studies inside of the car with potentially good or bad driving behaviors, which might inform the automated driving systems, or social interactions that are happening inside of cars.
I'll mention briefly, and then maybe Eric will want to pick it up. Yes, we have done. We have done some travel-alongs, drive-along. We both walked along with people as pedestrians, and you know, cameras, multiple angles, talk to them as they go. What are they experiencing? And we've done some drive-alongs as well. I will say that we did not use categorically the difference of whether people are good drivers or bad drivers. For one, we would have to sort of agree on what that means and a standard and according to who. But really we were more interested again in the broad range of everyday practice. And so we've done a bit of that. We will certainly be doing a lot more. And I'll let, do you want to speak to some of what you've done on that?
Well, I think you pretty well covered it. We did, I've done some observations of the current Nissan ADAS system. In fact, the gentleman standing right behind you. Now, he allowed me to tag along as he was using it on the highway. And so, yeah, we do, and then we try to capture, what was hard about doing the ethnography and the videotaping inside the car is that you need to try and capture as best you can the complete context in which the driver is. And that is to say, you have to have cameras on the, you know, basically seeing what the driver sees, but you also should have cameras on the instrument panel that they see. And frankly, you should really be able to see what they see in their rear view mirrors. And by that time, you are risking occluding the vision of the driver because of the multitude of cameras that you need in order to capture all of that. So it's quite challenging, but we have done so. Yeah.
Hi, Vivian Moshkina from Meetup Robotics. Thank you very much for the talk. I find the social aspects of autonomous vehicles absolutely fascinating. I have a ton of questions, but I'll probably limit it to a couple. Your design for external communication. Do you expect it to be completely intuitive to people? If you do you think there will be very similar designs across the board for different manufacturers? And I saw text in the video. How thoroughly do you expect to rely on textual cues as opposed to other types of cues?
Yeah, really good questions. I would say this, again, I'll stress, this is in research, and what you saw was a concept car. There is not a promise to bring that particular car to market as that. I think the intuitiveness, obviously, and you and I have spoken a little bit, we know that it is our job, and the UX people in the room will know it's our job to get it as intuitive as possible, to make it so that it will be easily understandable. But there is a chance that there will need to be some degree of informational scaffolding to help people understand, at least as they're introduced, what the signaling means. In terms of a standard, that will be a question of how the industry develops. We know that others have considered, to some degree at least, we don't know deeply how much research goes underneath it, but that there are certainly other concepts out there for some of the external communication. And it's probably a good thing if there's some different efforts in trials for a while until things we learn really what will be working best and what the standards would be. The text it's a really good question. I think we are considering other kinds of ways of using those displays if we need them at all. Iconographic, stops, things like that might be better. So we're in an experimental mode where we'll be testing some possibilities, and then of course in our own company, as things move more towards development, there will be others who will continue to refine and look at that. Text obviously has some huge limitations. You have to speak the language, you have to be of a reading age, have the right eyesight. There's any number of limitations of that, and we recognize that.
Gary, yeah. I guess my interest is in, have you looked into how you would semantically encode all this information? I think you had two really good examples. One is piggybacking, so you came up with a term to describe a particular type of behavior. And then there was another example, which is a pedestrian going around their car. And as you pointed out, it's obvious to any of us, and yet there isn't a single term that describes that particular behavior. So is that something that's part of your research? How do we encode, how do we create a grammar of those behaviors for the AV?
So that's actually a great summation of how we have sort of formulated our research and program and agenda. We're trying to understand sort of the language of the road, what the core dimensions, or if it boils down to a set of sort of dominant terms or states that indicate what's happening. So that those are exactly the kinds of things we're looking at. Yeah.
I'm Dan Barnes. My question is, how much have you looked at the weather conditions, how they impact the pedestrians crossing the road? Because I noticed pedestrians have a lot less eyesight at me. They seem to be much less situationally aware in heavy downpours or snow or other conditions, because I think they're more concerned about if raining or snowing or cold.
Well, this is mostly California-based research. I don't go out when it rains. It's a really good question, and to be honest, we have not looked at it very much.
Right back here, I've got a long queue going.
So, looking at the video that you showed earlier, which is about from 100 years ago, the experience of walking on the roads and driving, and comparing that to today, one might wonder, what is better? Could we ask that question? And should we, given that we are in an age where AV is not going to be dominant, especially in maybe 50 years, 20 years from us, so do you think that behavior should change in the future, or should it remain the same? Currently, I see you guys trying to communicate with the pedestrians. How do you decide whether, if you're communicating with the way people are behaving right now, that means you're saying behavior should remain the same, versus, be changed for something better. I find myself in a dilemma. Should this be done? Should not be done? How do I evaluate it? As a person driving the project, how do you take that problem?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. A couple of things. So we focus somewhat on what we might call self-organizing traffic situations, such as stop signs, where things are known to be ambiguous, and the things that there has to be a level of organization among the road users in order to get things through and get people through it safely. I think that as the regulations are, four-way stop signs in my I don't know, it seems a uniquely American invention, and not my favorite. So there are intersections where that's distinctly less at play, right? Come in more and more in order to regulate traffic for our safety. And I suspect that that's something that will continue. And in certain traffic situations, therefore, you see a lot less interaction between people. And the ones where there are interactions, I think, are the ones where you do find challenges. That said, if you look at intersections, for instance, in Vietnam or Jakarta, where there is a panoply of motorcycles going through the intersections, and they're largely self-organized. There's no protected left turns whatsoever. You're kind of amazed at how well that flows, and you do wonder whether a throughput like that would actually be achievable with a more regulated environment, and whether the self-regulated intersections might actually allow for a higher throughput than the other ones. I doubt it's the safer, but I think you raise a very interesting question.
If I could just add one little point, and this is me as the anthropologist and ethnographer, I want to make sure that even though we look at how things work today, we are not trying to recreate status quo. So we look at how things work today to imagine the possibilities for the future. And one of the clues that we look at, and the kinds of things I think Erik was hinting at, is how people break the rules, the workarounds, how people deal with problems, or the technical term we might call repairs, when there is a glitch of some kind. People innovate on the spot and on the ground to make things happen. So we try to pick up on what those are to imagine where things are going. And so my short answer to will things change? Absolutely. There's no denying that once we start having more autonomous systems on the road, it's changing. I've already changed. I now drive a car with 360-degree cameras. When I drive a car without those, I can tell you I'm pulling out of my parking spot differently, at least. Not always such a good thing either. So yeah, we're going to change with it, I think, is inevitable. And we're hoping to move that in the right, comfortable directions, appropriate and safe directions.
Hi. Have you thought about accidents? For example, if you're driving and the vehicle detects an oncoming collision, and will you choose to go into the collision or away to maybe pedestrians to save yourself, or the other side in the story?
So you're asking the favorite ethical question, right? What choice is the AV going to make? Well, as you probably know, there's a lot of work and consideration on this. Martin or others who are here, if you want to chime in as well, about how these systems actually operate. It will not have a predefined answer for those particular situations. It will be designed with some sort of learning capability, so as it develops and becomes capable of new things as it encounters them. But there will be, and that was the general premise of our talk, that these are human beings making these design and engineering decisions, and so certain assumptions will get built in. But it's not like that question will be answered, absolutely one way or another. All the situational factors would be taken into account, and the answers in each occasion, I believe, would be different.
Yeah, we have one question here. I can probably do one or two more questions on the right side. I know I've been neglecting you over here, sorry. And then we'll probably wrap up and bring people up.
So how far will the car go when the culture or driving culture is very different? So there are countries where a red light is just an opportunity. So how will the car react to come forward?
Yeah, no, your guess is as good as mine. I mean, I think that we're still continuing to advance and learn about all these different kinds of interactions. We've been in settings where that's the case, where a red light is merely a suggestion, or at least it's interpreted as such. And so, how it will encounter. Now, I think it does go back to the prior question, too, that as more autonomously driving systems are on the road, other things will sort of subtly adapt. So it's not, my sense is it won't be an all or nothing situation where suddenly you pop down a bunch of autonomous vehicles in a situation like that, unbeknownst to anybody, that it's unfamiliar. There will be some sort of adaptations and all along the way. But those are the kinds of challenges and variations that we're, again, trying to make ourselves sort of thorn in the side of our developers to say, what about this? What about that? How are we accounting for that?
Hi. So if I fast forward myself into the future, like we can argue when it would be that like majority of the cars, let's just say, are already autonomous cars, and we can realize, oh, I don't actually need a car. I don't need a car. I just need to have mobility. So I start using Lyft and Uber of the world, just without the driver. So marketers are already happy about all the time we will have in a car. So I wanted to talk about not only the communications between car and pedestrians, but car and the driver, or like not the driver, but the passenger inside. So if we are in a model that, okay, our ride will be cheaper when we're watching the commercials versus we pay more, premium if we're not watching a commercial in a car. I want to get your opinion as an anthropologist on such situations, what's the impact of a society then?
So I'll say a word. I don't know if Eric will also want to chime in. I think, well, of course, you hit the nail on the head in terms of what the frenzy is to consider, what might be happening. I think there's a lot of conjecture right now about how people will use their time inside the vehicles. You've premised your question on the assumption that we're using a lot more shared ride and non-owned cars. So that's one set of considerations. Of course, being at Nissan, we're also still very interested in the driving experience and people's actual experience in the car and having a car. My personal opinion, I don't speak on behalf of my company here, but is that it will not be an all or nothing in terms of the kind of future that holds, and whether we're going to go all the way to shared or all the way to owned. And I think that the variation of where and how the time is spent in the car will really matter. The other thing, and this is again me, well, this is me as an anthropologist, but not speaking, not the word of Nissan per se. I think some of the ideas about all the things people want to do in cars, like watch movies and sleep and all this, is a little possibly overhyped. I think if you think about it, the experience of moving through time and space in an enclosed vehicle, often with other people, is a unique experience. Family time is really special and different in vehicles. Couple time is different. The drive home when you need to decompress on your way home. There's a lot of other ways and advantages that people take to having this little room that they're moving through time and space in. And so do we really want to give all that up to make it just like every other room we're in? I don't know that that's really what will happen. I think we'll see a lot of different things occurring in the cars.
Okay, one more question, then I'm going to have to wrap up.
Thank you. There seems to be a definite concept of automotive body language that cars need to both be aware of and portray. Have you seen any predictable differences in the behavior of different types and sizes of vehicles that can be taken into consideration?
I don't think this is going to answer your question. Well, I would say, first of all, we haven't looked directly at that, and it's a great question. It's something to really explore as we continue to think about what the platform and form factors will be as we develop things. I do think that maybe following on the thing that I just mentioned, which is that there is a unique experience of traveling through time and space that traveling in a car or vehicle affords us. One of the opportunities that might be there is that a sort of small, well, you see the Twizzys in the back, this sort of smaller, more compact vehicle that's very personal, that allows a kind of more porous relationship to the outside, might be the kind of thing that is comfortable for people in a more autonomous sense, both from the outside, the friendly, approachable kind of thing, and also very observable. You don't have to be of a certain stature to see the top of it, or those sorts of things. So I think that there's a lot of possibilities for the differences, but as to the form factor of today's cars and what the interaction is, it's really not something we've we've explicitly looked at. Well, I'm curious why you ask. Do you have some thoughts yourself?
So I think it comes from just observing other drivers' behavior, it partly comes from if you've ever taught somebody else to drive, that can always be an interesting experience, to kind of start analyzing the different elements on the road. So just trying to be aware of that, how I portray what I'm going to do, and how I read into what other people are going to do.
Okay, thanks everybody. Round of applause for most.